Okay. In order to prevent you from falling asleep, I have two questions first. Just raise your hands if you have a smartphone. Okay. How many of you have already bought a second smartphone?
Ourselves.
Just for yourselves. Yeah. Okay. So here you have emerging technologies. And if you take the next slide. When this whole story started in 2008, we heard that there would be these smartphones and we would assess and what are they, what's so smart about them. They're like phones, but you can read your email or surf the web, and who would like to do that? We are like information overload anyhow. But then we started the work and started seeing these smartphones all around, and the growth has been exponential by now, and everybody has a smartphone. But the problem is, not everybody, I don't have a smartphone either, but I still have information overload. But the thing is that we don't know what happens next. The final deliverable is out and the future is in there. And these are all relevant assumptions. This one scenario assumes that once a person buys one smartphone, he won't buy another one. That's not true. This says that once a person buys one smartphone, he will continue buying new smartphones until he dies. That's not true either. So the truth is somewhere in between, and we try to explore that a bit. But if you put the next slide. So we started out with an environmental LCA and using the ILCD framework for identifying system boundaries, and identified a set of processes which could be relevant. And we first thought that it's the device. That's probably it's a new kind of device. It has more hardware, and that's probably the big thing. And if you put the next slide, then we know that. Then we realized that the device isn't the big issue, and if you put the next click, you'll see that. Actually, now the device might be roughly half of the carbon footprint. But in the future, because if you click on the next one, we get the and still click one. It's animated, great. In the future, we will use more and more data per phone, but at the same time, the electricity intensity of manufacture, or the carbon intensity of manufacture goes down, so the impact of the device will get smaller, but the impact of the networks and data transfer gets bigger. And this surprised us, that we repeated our calculations a lot until we kind of thought that actually this might be true. Next slide, please.
Can you point the microphone?
Yeah, I can point the microphone. And then at the technology level, because we have so many more phones in the future, probably, the networks and internet really burst out as a big hotspot in the technology. That unless something is done there's going to be a lot of emissions due to increased internet use because of the smartphones. And basically this just taught us that it's not the device, it's the impact of the device on the infrastructure that's needed to support the device, which was interesting. But then, if you take the next slide, we learned something else. From a 5-pillar viewpoint, the environment doesn't matter. So here we have the 5 pillars. You see that human health is not visible, the natural environment isn't that visible. What the big trends are that if we get a lot of new smartphones, it increases consumption, we get more GDP, which equals prosperity. But the problem is that that prosperity is very unequally distributed globally, so we get social impacts, which get also up. And then we have an issue with exhaustible resources. And there's a question mark here because the impact assessment models don't include indium, neodymium, praseodymium, etc. It's only gold and silver and platinum, and still it's visible there. But overall, we were taken by surprise. Our environmental LCA on the device didn't play a big role at this point. But we were also confused about the sustainability issue, if you put the next slide. Because if all the social impacts are caused by more profits in developing and developed countries, is this a bad thing? Like, the thing is that Smartphone use in EU will cause value added in non-OECD countries, but it will cause more value added in OECD countries. So you increase inequality, which is based on profit is bad. But you increase still the profits there and employment. And the crucial question is, after integration, is this really 20 times worse than an increase of 126 million hours of hazardous child labor in the system? I don't know. I'm an engineer. So, but I would have issues in saying that this is the main problem here. And the next slide, please. So, in spite of these, we were able to find some hotspots and make some recommendations for technology developers and method developers. First of all, it would seem that for technology developers, you should focus on the exhaustible resources. If we can get recycling up, device lifetimes up, we could decrease the exhaustible resource consumption. And based on the 5 pillars, that would have quite an impact on sustainability. On the social issues, there's already a lot of work on reducing child and low-wage labor that should be continued. But this is kind of a new thing, that the equality aspects in technology development, there should be something which could increase the value added in the developing countries also, so that it's not so unequally distributed. And also keep an eye out for data consumption, because now the trend has been that we have more powerful cameras and more faster processors and data transfer, which all encourages people to put more data on the internet. But it seems that it's actually causing a lot of impact somewhere in the cloud. And for method developers, this integration, that's challenging, because first of all, you could say that, okay, you have these impacts, but you have a lot of prosperity. So if I set my weights, then it's a net positive product, or is it? So, like, this is a bit, it's challenging. And also with the social issues, the example I showed, it kind of shows that it's difficult to integrate it. Is more profits in developing countries 20 times worse than a lot of child labor if you get even more profits in developed countries? So. And then the aspect that critical raw materials are missing from the method still, that limits the applicability a lot to any new technology which uses any scarce minerals, and I think there might be a few of those coming around. Thanks. Your turn to ask.
Thank you, Thomas. Any questions regarding methodology?
Thank you very much for this presentation. I've got one clarification question. As you've shown the graph with the bar on prosperity and the other impact categories, does a big bar mean that it's good, or is it then mean that it's bad? Because I didn't understand this correctly.
The red one is good and the blue one is bad. So prosperity is good and everything else is bad. We were troubled by the same aspect all the time.
Sorry, but red good when it's big or when it's small? I still don't.
The direction is switched. So if the bigger the bar, the worse, except for prosperity, which is red. Integration difficulties.
So the larger the bar, the worse.
The larger the bar, the worse, except for prosperity, which is the other way around.
Did you take into account the fact that the more prosperous countries nowadays are exporting jobs and also money to the developing countries? So your prosperity may in fact be in the wrong direction. Your conclusion,
Yeah.
that the wealthy countries get richer faster than the poor countries on the basis of this technology, I would say it's questionable, because the direction of capital flow and labor is the other way.
Yeah, the labor, the amount of labor done in developing countries is massive, but most of the value added of a smartphone is caused by the services for the smartphone. And if the use is in Europe, then the services are here. And the other big part is the retail trade. that takes huge chunk of the value.
Again, the service consumption in China and so on is rising faster than here.
Yeah, that's true. So if we take the global picture and include the smartphone consumption in China, then the picture will change. But we were limited that was only like smartphones consumed in the EU.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think
That's
we
a
should
good clarification.
we should delay the discussion to the real discussion afterwards. Please, the questions after the case studies, please try to deliver them to questions of understanding, but don't forget your other questions. We really want to hear also about the discussion later on. We have time allocated for that. The next